Chloe Harper's eyes snapped open at precisely 2:17 a.m. The digital numbers on her bedside clock glowed an eerie green, washing her small face in the color of sickness. Her chest rose and fell too quickly. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The bump on her neck, the one her mother had brushed off for days, was no longer just a bump. It pulsed with a rhythm of its own, an alien heartbeat inside her small body. With trembling fingers, Chloe reached for the unicorn flashlight that always stood guard beside her pillow. The plastic switch clicked, sending a narrow beam of light cutting across the shadows of her small bedroom. Barefoot, she stumbled toward the bathroom, the cold linoleum pressed against her feet as she leaned toward the mirror. What she saw made her stomach twist violently. The once tiny spot had grown to the size of a marble angry red, its center dark and strangely alive. She froze. No, things didn't move beneath your skin. That wasn't possible. And yet, her wide blue eyes refused to look away. The dark spot shifted. The surface split ever so slightly. Something thin and black pushed outward, twitching like a leg searching for air. A scream tore through her chest louder than any sound she had ever made. It ricocheted through the thin walls of their Pinewood apartment, slicing through the stillness of the night. Jessica Harper bolted upright in her bed, her heart pounding from the echo of her daughter's cry. At 32, she carried the exhaustion of someone 20 years older. Working 2 jobs had carved permanent shadows under her eyes. Her hands, once soft from years of nursing at County General Hospital, were now rough and cracked from industrial cleaning supplies. She stumbled into the hallway, calling her daughter's name. By the time she reached the bathroom, Chloe was sobbing, her flashlight clattering against the sink. Jessica pulled the child into her arms, whispering words she didn't believe. "It's okay. It's nothing." But her nurse's eyes couldn't ignore what she saw. The swelling wasn't normal. It wasn't just a bug bite anymore. For Chloe, curiosity had always been a second nature. At only 8 years old, she carried her father's adventurous streak like a birthright. Daniel Harper had been a soldier, a man who sought meaning in faraway deserts and never returned from Afghanistan. Chloe's blonde pigtails bounced whenever she wandered through the strip of woods behind the Pinewood apartments, searching for beetles and shiny rocks. Her small hands had touched more earth than toys. She was the kind of child who believed the world could fit inside a jar if only she could find the right lid. But childhood curiosity sometimes leaves scars. That Monday in late July, when the heat pressed down like a heavy blanket, Chloe had ventured too close to the creek. The air was thick with mosquitoes, gnats, and things that bit without warning. By the time she came home, her arms and legs were peppered with red welts. One, just below her hairline, itched more than the rest. "Mom, I think something bit me," she had called out as Jessica rushed to change into her gas station uniform. Jessica had spared it a glance, her nurse's training flashing across her tired mind. "Red, swollen, but soft. Just a mosquito bite, honey. There's calamine lotion in the cabinet. Try not to scratch it, okay?" She kissed her daughter's forehead, grabbed her keys, and disappeared into the night, leaving Chloe alone with cartoons and a peanut butter sandwich. The Pinewood apartments were the cheapest place Jessica could find after losing their small home. The water-stained ceilings and drafty windows carried the weariness of too many families who had come and gone, each leaving behind shadows of their struggles. Just 1 mile away, Oak Ridge gleamed with manicured lawns and shining SUVs in driveways. Chloe's classmate Madison Whitaker lived there in a world of ballet lessons and birthday parties Jessica could never afford. Jessica's landlord, Charles Whitaker, Madison's father, was a man who wore wealth like a weapon. He owned not just Pinewood but also the sprawling chemical plant that loomed at the edge of the woods where Chloe played. His inspections were unannounced, his warnings sharp, his threats of eviction sharper. In the thin margin between Pinewood and Oak Ridge, Jessica Harper was holding her life together with threads. That night, when Jessica returned from her cleaning shift past 10 o'clock, she crept into Chloe's room. Her daughter was asleep, the lamp still glowing. Jessica saw the smear of pink calamine lotion on Chloe's neck, made a mental note to check it in the morning, and collapsed into her own bed. Sleep came heavy and unforgiving. By Tuesday morning, the bite had grown redder, harder, the center pushing upward like a seed about to sprout. Chloe dabbed more lotion on it, read her mother's scribbled breakfast note, and trudged to school. The itching became unbearable during math class. Her teacher noticed her fidgeting, and the school nurse pressed gloved fingers to the inflamed skin. "This looks angry," she murmured, dialing Jessica's number. But Jessica, trapped at her shift at Gas and Go, her manager glaring across the counter, could only whisper into the phone, "Apply ointment. Give her ibuprofen. I'll take her to urgent care this weekend if it's worse." It was always a choice, her child's health or the job that paid the rent. Wednesday morning arrived with heavy clouds. Chloe woke to a dull, throbbing ache her small body fevered. The lump had doubled in size overnight, its surface shiny and stretched. When she pressed it, a bead of yellowish fluid welled up. She nearly vomited. "Mom," she whispered as Jessica rushed past the bathroom, half-brushed hair sticking to her cheeks. "It hurts." Jessica bent to look the nurse in her, cataloging the danger. Inflammation, infection, purulence. But the mother in her, the one terrified of losing her last paycheck, saw only another problem she didn't have time to solve. "It's infected," she said, handing Chloe a tube of ointment. "Use this. No scratching. We'll see how it looks tonight." She kissed her daughter's temple and left her heart splitting in two directions as the door shut behind her. By Thursday, Chloe could barely turn her head. The swelling pressed against her skin like something alive beneath the surface. She whispered that she couldn't go to school. Jessica hesitated, torn between love and survival. Her supervisor's voice still echoed, "If you don't show up, don't bother coming back." Monday. She pressed a dose of ibuprofen into Chloe's palm, promised to have Mrs. Evelyn Carter check on her, and left for work, her chest burning with guilt. That afternoon, Mrs. Carter's voice cracked through the phone. "Jessica, she's burning with fever. That spot, it doesn't look right." Jessica closed her eyes. There was no money, no time, no margin for mistakes. Chug. By Friday morning, Chloe could no longer rise from her bed. The swelling jutted grotesquely from her neck skin, taut, fever raging. Jessica, confronted with undeniable truth, made the call, "We're going to urgent care." The waiting room reeked of antiseptic and sweat. Families slumped in plastic chairs, clutching forms, waiting their turn in the endless American ritual of illness and bureaucracy. At the desk, the receptionist frowned at Jessica's record. Outstanding balance $430. Minimum payment $100 before treatment. Jessica's credit card nearly cracked between her fingers as she paid, her stomach hollowing with the knowledge that groceries would vanish from next week's budget. Dr. Kaplan examined Chloe, his brow furrowing as he pressed around the angry, swollen mass. "This is more than a bite. Start her on antibiotics immediately. If it worsens, don't wait. Go to the ER." Jessica clutched the prescription. At the pharmacy counter, her wallet held only enough for one of the two medications. She chose the antibiotics, whispering a prayer as she handed the pills to her child that night. But prayers could not stop what had already taken root beneath Chloe's skin. If you've been following Chloe's terrifying journey so far, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. This is only the beginning. By Saturday morning, the antibiotics had barely touched the fire burning through Chloe Harper's small body. She lay sprawled in bed, her skin pale and damp, the swelling at her neck larger now, its surface stretched to an unnatural sheen. Jessica sat beside her, spooning tepid water past cracked lips, counting the seconds between her daughter's shallow breaths. She told herself the medicine just needed more time, but her nurse's mind rebelled. Infections did not grow larger once antibiotics were introduced. The ache in her chest was no longer simple worry. It was dread. Outside, Pinewood stirred awake. Neighbors shuffled to cars, hauling laundry baskets to coin laundromats, children darting between cracked sidewalks. But inside, apartment 2B time collapsed into fever and fear. Ew. Chloe whimpered in her sleep, tiny hands clawing at her bandaged neck. Jessica caught them, gently whispering, "Don't scratch baby." But even unconscious Chloe writhed her body, seeking release from the horror beneath her skin. When the thermometer blinked 101.8, Jessica dialed Dr. Kaplan's office with shaking hands. The weekend receptionist answered voice flat with routine exhaustion. "If it's urgent, ma'am, take her to the emergency room." The emergency room meant debt bills already stacked like tombstones on Jessica's kitchen counter. She hung up without responding, pressing the receiver to her forehead until it left a red mark. Her pride had kept her from government aid from asking for help, but pride couldn't cool Chloe's fever. Still, she waited. Dun-dun. That afternoon, a knock rattled the apartment door. Jessica opened it to find Madison Whitaker standing there, a get-well card clutched in the polished fingers, her sundress pressed to perfection. Behind her loomed Charles Whitaker himself, silver hair, immaculate smile, sharp as glass. "Miss Harper," he said, eyes flicking past her into the cramped apartment. "We've had complaints about pests in the building. Inspectors will be around Monday morning." Jessica stiffened. "We don't have pests." Whitaker's smile never faltered. "Mandatory for all units." His eyes slid toward Chloe's closed bedroom door before returning to Jessica. "And your rent, Miss Harper, late again. You'll need to bring it current." When they left, Jessica's chest burned with humiliation. Pest inspections, late notices, debt collectors, they all blurred together into the same relentless storm. But tonight, there was no room for humiliation. Only Chloe's "Oi." That evening, Evelyn Carter came with soup, the smell of chicken broth filling the apartment like a memory of better times. She settled into a chair at Chloe's bedside, her weathered hands stroking the child's damp hair. "She reminds me of my Albert when he had a boil back in '82, she said softly. "Doctor had to lance it. Painful business." Jessica swallowed hard. "The antibiotics will help. They have to." But Evelyn's gaze was steady, her voice unflinching. "Sometimes medicine can't fix what's wrong on its own. Sometimes you need someone brave enough to cut." Jessica looked away ashamed. She had once been that someone back when her hands still belonged in a hospital. Now they only scrubbed toilets and stocked shelves. Tid. By Sunday morning, Chloe's fever spiked again, sweat soaking through her pajamas. The swelling at her neck had changed. It was no longer just red. A small, dark spot had formed at its center, fibrous and alien. Jessica touched it with a cotton swab and swore she felt the flesh recoil. "Mom," Chloe whispered, her eyes glassy with fear. "It feels like something's moving inside." Jessica froze, her blood turning to ice. She forced a smile, brushing damp hair from her daughter's face. "It's just inflammation. Infections throb like that sometimes." But she didn't believe it. Not anymore. The walls of Pinewood seemed to close in on her. She thought of the creek where Chloe played the chemical plant looming over the trees, the way the water sometimes shimmered with unnatural colors. She thought of Whitaker's casual mention of pests, of his power over their fragile lives. And she thought of her daughter's voice. "It feels like something's moving." Ting. By late afternoon, neighbors had begun to whisper. The Wilsons stopped by with a coloring book, but their eyes lingered too long on Chloe's swollen neck. "You know, Sarah," Mrs. Wilson said awkwardly, "my sister's a social worker. If you need help with medical costs." Jessica cut her off sharply. "We're fine." Later, through the thin walls, she heard them whisper, "That poor child. Someone should call child services if she doesn't take her to a hospital soon." The words struck like blows. She, Jessica Harper, who had once saved children in hospital wards, now accused of neglecting her own. Shame curled in her gut like a parasite. That night, when Chloe finally dozed into fevered sleep, Jessica sat at the kitchen table staring at the unopened bills. Her wedding band caught the dim light, a circle of gold that mocked her failures. Daniel had died overseas, and she had been left to fight wars of her own against poverty, against exhaustion, against a system that measured her worth in overdue balances. Now the war was at her doorstep, burrowed under her daughter's skin. When the knock came again, Jessica opened the door to find Dr. Lauren Mitchell standing there, medical bag in hand. It had been 10 years since they had spoken, since Jessica chose Daniel over Lauren's brother, since friendship had fractured into silence. Yet, here she was, rain clinging to her coat eyes, sharp and unreadable. "Evelyn called me," Lauren said simply. "She said Chloe's condition is worsening." Jessica's relief clashed with humiliation. To be seen like this broken failing, desperate by the friend she had lost. But pride had no place tonight. She stepped aside. "Come in." "Sure." Lauren's examination was silent, clinical, her gloved hands gentle as she studied the grotesque swelling. Her lips tightened, betraying concern. "How long has it been like this?" she asked finally. "Since Monday," Jessica whispered. "It started small. I thought it was just a mosquito bite." Lauren's gaze flicked upward. "What antibiotics is she on? Cephalexin?" It was all I could afford. Something flickered in Lauren's expression. Pity, judgment, maybe both. She pulled a syringe from her bag. "This is stronger. I'm giving her an injection, but Jessica, she needs a hospital. Tonight." Jessica twisted her hands, shame, bleeding into panic. "We can't afford." "I have privileges at County General," Lauren interrupted firmly. "I can admit her under my care. No more waiting." Jessica glanced at the mirror across the room. The reflection showed a ghostly child, her face warped by swelling, her skin drained of color. In that moment, she saw what the neighbors saw, what child services would see, not a mother protecting her child, but a woman failing at the most sacred duty of all. She nodded, her voice breaking. "Let's go." "Oh, I said." Rain lashed the streets as Lauren's car sped through the city, Jessica clutching Chloe in the back seat. The hospital loomed ahead, fluorescent lights cutting through the storm. Inside, County General pulsed with urgency, voices echoing through corridors, gurneys rattling against tile. Lauren strode past the waiting room, bypassing the line of weary families, announcing herself to the triage nurse. "Direct admit. Exam room 3. Surgical consult now." Jessica followed, her shoes squeaking against the linoleum, her arms aching from holding Chloe. Nurses parted the hallway like waves around a stone, their faces registering alarm at the child's swollen neck. In exam room 3, bright lights illuminated Chloe's small form as she lay on the table, her eyes half closed, breath shallow. Jessica took her hand, whispering, "You're safe now, baby. Mommy's here." But inside, she trembled. Safe was not a word she believed anymore. If you're gripped by Chloe's terrifying story, don't forget to subscribe. What comes next will shock you even more. The truth waiting under her skin is nothing anyone could have imagined. The exam room at County General Hospital had been transformed into a makeshift surgical suite within minutes. The hum of fluorescent lights pressed down from above, cold and unforgiving, illuminating Chloe Harper's small frame on the table. Jessica sat beside her daughter, holding her hand, watching as Dr. Lauren Mitchell prepared the instruments. A nurse adjusted the surgical light, the metallic tray beside the bed gleaming with scalpels, forceps, and gauze. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, sharp enough to sting the back of Jessica's throat. Dr. Henry Collins, the gray-haired surgeon summoned by Lauren, entered with steady footsteps, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. He glanced once at Chloe's neck, then exchanged a look with Lauren that made Jessica's chest tighten. "We need to drain this abscess immediately," Collins said. His tone clipped no room for argument. "There's significant tension in the tissue. Delay could compromise her airway or the vascular structures." Jessica nodded numbly, squeezing Chloe's hand, though her daughter's eyes were already glassy with exhaustion. She wanted to scream, to demand that they stop the world and let her child rest, but there was no stopping what had already begun. "Cool." Chloe's voice trembled as she whispered, "Will it hurt?" Collins crouched to her level, his voice softened with practiced gentleness. "You'll feel some pressure, sweetheart, but we'll give you medicine to make sure you don't feel pain. like when the dentist works on your teeth. Jessica brushed damp hair from her daughter's forehead. "You're so brave," she whispered, though her own voice shook. "Daddy would be proud of you right now." Chloe's lips twitched into the faintest smile before her eyelids fluttered shut under the local anesthetic. Tink. The scalpel glinted as Collins made the first precise incision. Jessica's stomach lurched, but her nurse's training forced her to keep watching. A thick, yellowish fluid spilled from the cut, pooling on sterile gauze. The nurse suctioned swiftly, clearing the field, while Lauren leaned close, collecting samples for culture. Significant purulence. Collins muttered, his voice clinical detached. Consistent with advanced bacterial infection. Jessica tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the rhythm of her daughter's chest rising and falling. This was medicine. This was routine. It had to be. But then the routine shattered. As Collins widened the incision to release more fluid, something shifted beneath the surface of Chloe's skin. It wasn't just pus. Something dark, segmented alive. "What the hell?" Collins whispered, his composure cracking. Lauren's eyes widened. Forceps, she snapped. The nurse placed the instrument into Collins's waiting hand. With deliberate precision, he reached into the wound and grasped the emerging object. Jessica's breath caught as he pulled it free. Clamped in the steel jaws of the forceps, wriggling weakly, was a swollen insect. Its body was bloated, translucent with blood, its legs flailing against the air. A bedbug, but grotesquely engorged, far larger than any Jessica had ever seen. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the monitor. One of the nurses gasped the sound, sharp as glass. Jessica pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, nausea and horror battling inside her. Chloe stirred faintly, mumbling, "Is it gone?" Her small voice cracked Jessica's heart in two. "Yes, baby," Jessica whispered, though tears blurred her vision. "They found what was making you sick." Collins deposited the insect into a specimen container that Lauren sealed immediately. Her hands shook only slightly as she labeled it for the lab, but the horror wasn't finished. As Collins probed deeper into the cavity, two more smaller insects emerged, writhing against the sterile air. Each was quickly captured and sealed away, but the sight made Jessica's knees buckle. She gripped the edge of the table, clinging to the one truth she could still grasp. Her daughter was breathing. When the cavity was finally cleared, Collins irrigated the wound with steady hands. "Drain placed," he murmured, stitching carefully. "We'll keep it in for 24 hours to allow any residual fluid to escape." Jessica stared at the tiny plastic tube protruding from her daughter's neck, her mind refusing to reconcile what she had just seen. Bedbugs. Inside her child. Living beneath her skin. Chloe's color was already improving, the pressure relieved. She opened her eyes briefly, whispering, "It doesn't hurt as much." Jessica bent low, kissing her daughter's temple, tears wetting her skin. "That's because they're gone now, sweetheart. They're gone." Outside the room, Lauren's voice was low but urgent as she spoke to Jessica. "This isn't normal. Bedbugs don't burrow into human skin. They feed and retreat. What we found, it shouldn't be possible." Jessica leaned against the wall, her hands trembling. "Then what was it? You saw them. They were bedbugs." "They were," Lauren said, her eyes grim, "but they've been altered somehow. We'll know more once the lab analyzes them." Jessica's thoughts flew to Pinewood, to Whitaker Chemicals looming over the woods where Chloe played to the creek, shimmering with chemical sheen. She whispered, "The water. She plays there all the time." Lauren's expression hardened. "We'll need to test it immediately. If this is environmental, it could affect more than Chloe." Jessica's mind reeled. All she had wanted was to survive paycheck to paycheck to keep her daughter fed and clothed. Now she stood in the center of something larger, darker, more dangerous than she could have imagined. When Jessica returned to Chloe's bedside, her daughter was sleeping peacefully, the first real rest in days. Jessica brushed her hair back, marveling at the softness of her breathing. Relief warred with terror because even as Chloe healed, the world outside was unraveling. At the nurse's station, a woman in a crisp suit appeared, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself with professional calm. "Angela Reed, Child, Protective Services. Miss Harper. I need to ask you some questions about your daughter's care." Jessica felt her knees weaken. Even here, even now, as her child lay bandaged and recovering, the system still hunted for blame. Lauren stepped forward, her voice firm. "Ms. Reed, I was present. The progression of Chloe's condition was atypical. Miss Harper acted as soon as it became clear this was more than an ordinary infection." Angela nodded, making notes. "Be that as it may, I am required to complete an assessment." Jessica closed her eyes, the humiliation sharp as glass. She thought of her late husband Daniel and how proud he had been to serve his country, and here she was, his widow, being measured by strangers to see if she was fit to mother her own child. She whispered a silent vow to her daughter's sleeping form. "I will not let them take you, no matter what it costs." Chegg. That night, rain streaked the hospital windows as Jessica sat in the darkened room, Chloe's hand curled inside hers. Machines hummed softly. Monitors beeped with steady rhythm. For the first time in days, her daughter slept without fever, without pain. But Jessica could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them again. The segmented bodies, the writhing legs, the grotesque parody of life wriggling from her child's flesh. Her daughter carried scars, now not just on her neck, but on her innocence. And Jessica carried a new war. The morning after surgery broke clear and bright, as if the storms of the night before had been scrubbed from the sky. Sunlight spilled across the sterile floors of County General Hospital, glinting off steel and glass. Jessica Harper stirred awake in the stiff vinyl chair beside her daughter's bed. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw Chloe sleeping peacefully, the bandage at her neck clean and white, a thin drain still in place. The steady beep of the monitor soothed her like a lullaby. Relief coursed through her so sharp it left her dizzy. For the first time in nearly a week, her child looked safe. Dr. Henry Collins came for early rounds, his tone cautious but hopeful. "The swelling is down. Drainage is minimal. We'll remove the tube this afternoon if improvement continues." Jessica nodded, her chest loosening slightly. But a gnawing question still remained, what had been living under her daughter's skin. That question followed her into the hallway where she met Lauren Mitchell. The younger woman carried a tablet, her dark eyes grim. "The lab's initial analysis is back," Lauren said quietly. "They were bedbugs, yes, but not behaving like any bedbugs I've ever seen. They showed aggressive subcutaneous invasion, something unheard of in their species, and their tissues contained traces of chemicals, industrial solvents, insecticides." Jessica froze. "Chemicals? You think they were altered?" Lauren nodded. "We don't know how yet, but something in their environment has changed them." Jessica's mind leapt to the creek behind Pinewood, to the factory that loomed over the trees. "Whitaker." "Chemicals," she whispered. Lauren didn't argue. "County inspectors are already testing the water, but Jessica, there's more. You need to see this." Back in Chloe's room, Jessica rummaged through her purse and found the small padded envelope that had been slipped under their apartment door days before. She had nearly forgotten it in the rush of fevers and hospital corridors. Inside was a teddy bear, old but carefully stitched, with a folded note tucked in its belly. Jessica read it again, her hands trembling. "Sarah and Sophie. Tom wanted his little girl to have this. He carried it in Afghanistan. I found it among his things after. He spoke of you both every day. Sergeant Mike Danner." The words blurred before her eyes. She whispered aloud. "Daniel. His name was Daniel, not Tom." The note had used the wrong name. Her stomach dropped. Lauren leaned close, studying the handwriting. "There's no Sergeant Danner in Army records." "I checked." Jessica clutched the bear tighter, as though it might dissolve in her grip. Then who sent this? As if in answer, something flaked from the bear's stitched seam, tiny dark specks, shed casings, bedbug shells. Jessica recoiled, dropping the bear to the floor. Her voice cracked. No, not from him, not from Daniel. They used his memory. Lauren knelt carefully, sealing the bear into a plastic evidence bag. Her expression was hard furious. This wasn't a keepsake. It was a weapon. Dead. That afternoon, the hospital corridors buzzed with new arrivals. County health officials, inspectors from the Environmental Protection Agency, and, to Jessica's surprise, a district attorney named Jonathan Hayes. He carried himself like a man accustomed to high ceilings and heavy consequences. In a small consultation room, Jessica sat opposite Hayes and Angela Reed from Child Protective Services. Lauren remained by her side. Hayes leaned forward. "Miss Harper, we need to ask about Charles Whitaker. You've rented from him for 2 years, correct?" Jessica nodded, her throat dry. "Has he ever mentioned infestations, inspections, anything unusual tied to pests?" Jessica remembered his visit days earlier, his too casual smile. "Mandatory inspection? Complaints of pests?" "Yes," she whispered. "He came by just before Chloe collapsed. He said there would be inspectors on Monday." He looked at her neck as though he already knew. Hayes exchanged a glance with Angela Reed, then turned back. "We have reason to believe Whitaker has been deliberately introducing contaminated insects into Pinewood Apartments. If true, it amounts to reckless endangerment, possibly attempted manslaughter." Jessica's breath left her in a rush. "Why? Why would he do that?" Lauren answered for him. "Because he's wanted Pinewood for years. If the building was condemned due to infestation, property values would crash. He could buy the land cheap and expand his factory." The words struck Jessica like a blow. Her landlord had gambled with her daughter's life for profit. That evening, as Chloe dozed beneath the glow of hospital monitors, Jessica sat in the temporary family apartment the hospital provided. Her hands shook as she reread the false note. Tom. Sophie. Wrong names, wrong soldier, but the right wound to reopen. Whoever had written it knew how to cut her deepest. The cruelty of it burned in her chest. Daniel had died serving a country that forgot her the moment his body was lowered into the ground. And now his memory had been weaponized to smuggle death into their home. She pressed her forehead to the cool window pane, watching the city lights flicker. The tears that came were not soft. They were jagged, bitter, edged with fury. 2 days later, results from the lab confirmed what Lauren had feared. The parasites removed from Chloe and from the teddy bear carried identical chemical signatures: permethrin, dichlorvos, industrial solvents, all traced back to the runoff found in the creek by Whitaker Chemicals. The county issued a cease and desist. EPA trucks rolled into the neighborhood, collecting water, soil, and samples from every corner of Pinewood. Reporters followed their cameras, capturing images of yellow tape stretched across the apartment complex. Jessica watched from the hospital window, her daughter's hand in hers, as the life she had scraped together was sealed off as evidence. Their furniture, their clothes. Chloe's school books, all contaminated. There would be no going back. When Hayes returned, his words were heavy with finality. "We executed a search warrant on Whitaker's offices. Documents indicate he was planning to acquire Pinewood after a forced evacuation. Pest control logs suggest he had contractors introducing insects into units." Jessica gripped Chloe's small hand tighter. "He used my daughter." Hayes's expression softened. "And now he'll answer for it." Angela Reed, once skeptical, now met Jessica's eyes with something like respect. "You fought for her, Miss Harper. Against poverty, against the system, against him. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Jessica swallowed hard, her pride fractured but still standing. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it might not end in loss. That night, as Chloe sketched in her coloring book, she drew 3 figures: a girl with a bandage, a woman with curls, and another in a white coat. Above them, in uneven child's letters, she wrote, My family gets bigger. Jessica traced the words with her finger, her throat tight. For years it had been just her and Chloe against the world. But now, perhaps there was room for more for Lauren, for neighbors, for a community finally awake to its own wounds. And perhaps there was room, too, for justice. If you've stayed with Chloe and Jessica this far, subscribe to the channel. The final chapter is coming, the fight for justice and the healing that follows. If you're still with Chloe and Jessica on this harrowing journey, make sure you're subscribed. The worst may be behind them, but the truth that's coming could shake an entire community. Spring arrived late in Pinewood that year. The trees along the cracked sidewalks sprouted shy blossoms, pale pinks and whites trembling in the wind as though uncertain whether to trust the season. The neighborhood had been sealed off for weeks, yellow tape fencing in the apartments like a scar that refused to heal, but slowly life was returning. Jessica Harper stood on the courthouse steps, Chloe's small hand wrapped in hers. Around them, neighbors from Pinewood gathered, faces once tired, now lit with a mixture of anger and relief. News vans lined the street, microphones thrust forward like weapons of curiosity. Inside, the trial of Charles Whitaker had unfolded in careful detail. Pages of contracts, pest control, logs, chemical waste reports, all pointing to a man who had gambled with human lives for the sake of property lines and profit margins. Jessica had sat through every day of testimony, her heart a steady drumbeat of grief and fury. She listened as lawyers recited phrases like reckless endangerment, corporate negligence, and malicious intent. But behind the language of law, she heard only one truth. He chose my daughter's body as collateral. King. The verdict came on a bright Thursday morning. Guilty on all counts. Whitaker's face, once so polished and untouchable, crumpled into something almost human as the judge's gavel fell. Yet Jessica felt no satisfaction in his downfall. Justice, she realized, was not about vengeance. It was about survival, about ensuring no other child would wake screaming with creatures gnawing beneath their skin. Chloe squeezed her mother's hand, her voice small but steady. "Does this mean it's over?" Jessica knelt, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's cheek, the scar at her neck still faintly pink. "It means we're safe now. It means we can start again." Shed. That start did not come easily. Pinewood apartments were condemned, their windows dark and hollow, the once bustling halls echoing with silence. Families scattered, some to relatives, others to shelters. Jessica and Chloe were placed in temporary housing, a modest unit provided through the county's emergency relocation program. The walls were thin, the furniture second-hand, but Chloe laughed again, chasing sunbeams across the floor, and for Jessica, that laughter was enough. Lauren visited often, her presence steady as stone. What had been a fractured friendship grew again slowly, carefully, into something stronger than before. Together they filled out paperwork, met with inspectors, and planned futures that once seemed impossible. Sad. It was Evelyn Carter, the elderly neighbor who had first brought soup and solace, who suggested the idea of the garden. "They'll build condos where Pinewood stood," she said one evening, rocking gently on her porch chair. "But before they do, we should plant something there, something for the ones who suffered, something that will remind people we were here." And so they did. On a Saturday morning, families returned to the fenced lot carrying shovel seeds and saplings. Children knelt beside their parents, digging into the earth that had once poisoned them, pressing in marigolds, sunflowers, and lilac bushes. Volunteers from nearby churches brought mulch and watering cans. Someone painted a sign that read, "Pinewood Memorial Garden, from pain to bloom." Jessica and Chloe planted a young oak together, their hands dirty with soil, their laughter carried on the wind. Jessica whispered a prayer as she pressed the roots into the ground, for survival, for healing, for tomorrow. That's it. The garden flourished. By midsummer, blossoms spilled over the chain-link fence, colors defiant against the backdrop of concrete. Reporters returned not for scandal this time, but to film the resilience of a neighborhood that refused to disappear. Chloe, her strength returned, ran between the rows of flowers, her laughter ringing like bells. She wore her scar like a badge no longer hidden but embraced. Jessica watched her tears stinging her eyes and realized the scar was not just Chloe's. It was the community's. It marked them. All hurt, endured horror survived, but it also testified to their rebirth. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the garden in gold, Jessica sat on a bench carved by volunteers. Lauren joined her, the silence between them no longer heavy with old wounds but light with possibility. "You saved her," Jessica said softly. Lauren shook her head. "You saved her. You never gave up." They sat together as Chloe played with other children, her laughter carrying into the dusk. For the first time in years, Jessica felt the weight on her chest lift. Not gone entirely. Grief never truly left, but lighter transformed into something bearable. Something almost like hope. Months later, on the anniversary of Chloe's surgery, the community gathered again in the garden. Lanterns were lit, their soft glow illuminating faces old and young. Jessica spoke briefly, her voice unsteady but strong. "We lived in shadows," she said, her hand resting on Chloe's shoulder. "But we came into light. We were broken, but we chose to bloom. This garden is proof that from pain can come beauty, and from loss can come life." Applause rippled through the crowd, but it was Chloe who gave the night its final word. She stepped forward shyly, holding up her sketchbook. Pages filled with drawings of flowers, houses, and people, hand in hand. "This is our story," she said simply. "We grew back." The crowd fell silent, the lanterns swaying gently in the evening breeze. Later, as they walked home beneath the stars, Jessica carried the sound of her daughter's words in her heart. The war she had fought against poverty, against despair, against a man who treated lives as numbers was not over, but it had changed shape. Now it was a war for growth, for joy, for the kind of future Daniel would have wanted for them both. Jessica squeezed Chloe's hand. "We grew back," she repeated softly, and this time she believed it. Chloe and Jessica's journey has shown us that even in the darkest places, light can bloom again. If this story touched you, subscribe for more healing journeys, because together we remind the world broken does not mean defeated.